5 years ago, I'm not even sure of the time, at the Denver Art Museum that Mary put together, and that was in person. And through the wonders of Zoom, here we are again. So I want to stress this part about we're afraid to ask. I'll do a brief introduction, and then I'd love to know what you'd like to know about art appraising. Somebody asked about how I got into that. And so with Mary's preamble, I will say at one point in doing these various things, I thought, I've seen an awful lot of art over the years. I've had the wonderful opportunities and different types, all of American, Western, and what can I do with that? So I thought maybe I could become an appraiser. And the person who sponsored me was the late Jolie Dewsbury. She was an appraiser in New York before she moved to Denver and talked to me about it and sponsored me. So I'm a member of the AAA, not to be confused with AA, just Appraisers Association of America. So I'm an accredited member. I take tests, a follow-up test every 2 years, and that's the organization to which Jolie sponsored me. So one of the things, and do be thinking about your questions, but one of the things, the big thing to talk about is the difference between insurance valuation and fair market value. So when an appraiser, when you call an appraiser, meet with appraiser, that person would say, and for what purpose is this? Is this for estate or donation, or what's the purpose of the appraisal? If it's for insurance, that is replacement value. That is the highest value to replace your piece of art. Wherever you might have to go to buy it, I mean, that sometimes is factored in. Now there's so much buying online, that's a little different. But if you had to go to Santa Fe to see a piece, that would have to be might be factored into insurance, or to go to New York if it was something pretty specialized. So back to this highest value, think about just the replacement. If you drive your car off the lot and it's in a wreck, you want it insured for the value, the absolute replacement value of that model, that year, etc. So something I also want to mention is about each insurance company has a slightly different idea, different standard. For some insurance companies, the value, your receipt, or getting the value from the gallery from which you purchase something is sufficient for some insurance companies. So this is something to check for your insurance, and it should be done according to whatever their rules, every 5 years, 4 years. Each insurance company varies. So that's the total replacement value for insurance. The other is fair market value. And this is when you go to sell a piece, what is the likely market value of that? And as you know, the diamond ring you buy at the mall, were it open, and then tried to sell the next day or week or year, it would be highly unlikely you would get that same price for it. So that's what fair market value looks into. And there's a discrepancy, there's a difference, but there's no formula, there's no percentage that it loses its value. Each piece is different. So the appraisal process is that the appraiser needs to see the piece physically, to look at the piece, to photograph it, to measure it, to ascertain the condition, you know, as they're flaking in the lower right, to look at the signature. That's the process that the appraiser needs to see the piece. And usually it's done at somebody's home, and I'm talking locally. Although people have brought smaller pieces to me in that occasion, but so there's that process. I personally charge $200 an hour, and the first hour is this inspection and look at that. Then the process is one of research. So if it's a well-known artist, let us say Winslow Homer, then I would begin to do research online. I subscribe to an online service that lists every piece traded at public auction. So I can't find out about private sales, gallery sales, because often they're negotiated, and that's private information, what you paid at a gallery. But at auction, let's say our local auction, Leslie Hindman, the Hindman auction, that's all now online to a subscriber to this series. So I would then start research and think about a comparable. It's like real estate and comparables, how many square feet, what location. But so it's knowing, looking at something of the same subject, same palette probably, same style, same dimensions, and then making an appraisal from there and listing that, you know, saying there were 3 Daniel Strick paintings of this size, but I felt the one most comparable was worth this amount, and therefore I value this painting at that amount. So have a question if that's not clear. Just a minute, I have a few notes. Then if we want to talk about collecting, I would be happy to talk about that. Because as you know, and as Mary said, I've worked for several private collectors and found this to be very interesting. The first thing I would say is have a focus, and that focus can be a very broad interest if it's Western art. But yes, Western art of what period? Is it historic Western art? Is it contemporary Western art? Is it Western art from a certain state or a certain area of a state? And, you know, rules are made to be broken. So once you've set to say, this is what I'm collecting, and then you see a beautiful still life and say, oh, I really like that, that's okay. You don't have to hold yourself to that. But the best collectors I know have had a focus. And as they've gone along, I've seen their focus become more focused, if you will. And I'll use as an example Tom Petrie. You all know he has a marvelous collection of the work of Charlie Russell. He has collected Charlie Russell's everything, paintings, sculpture, memorabilia, everything for many years. When I first knew Tom, when I was at the Denver Art Museum, he was collecting a little more widely in Western art. And he had a magnificent Remington Night painting that was in that wonderful Remington Night paintings show, a masterpiece. And at one point, Tom sold that masterpiece, that Remington, to focus more closely on Charlie Russell, that he raised some more funds to buy some more Charlie Russell pieces. So as a result, he has, I don't know how to quantify it, but one of the finest collections of Charlie Russell in the world. So there's a focus. Frederick Mayer, as a collector, had 6 different collections. So he would focus on one. He'd collect thoroughly in those different areas, which is another way of collecting. So back to having a focus. Then how to educate yourself. And it's looking, going to the gallery, saying, what do I like? What strikes me here? Then narrowing that, what do you like, and what is it that attracts you? Is it color? Is it form? Is it, yeah, think about why you like what you like. And then follow that feeling. Who's the artist doing the best of that kind of work? And even think historically, back to who, if you love seascapes, think about, once again, we're back at Winslow Homer. Think of some of those East Coast artists who did magnificent seascapes. So look at them, compare them, say, what am I drawn to? Why do I like this one better than this one? So it's your process of self-education. Then where is that art found? Is it locally? And if so, establish a relationship with a dealer. And dealers are so eager to talk to you about the artists they represent and what's going on in their galleries. And be curious, be open, and give things a chance to speak to you. Just spend some time with the pieces. And I would think when galleries open up that this would be a really good time to go and look. I think most gallerists are just really welcome of people who are serious about looking and asking intelligent questions and looking for information. And that's how you figure out what it is you'd like to live with. So I think that's all I have to say on that point. And I'm ready for questions if you all are.
Okay, I can start with some we've received from our listeners. How is it possible to appraise a piece where the artist is not well known? In other words, you may go online to search his auction records and there are none. Does it mean that the more unknown persons really you can't determine the value?
That's important to know. How you determine that value is by finding something like that and stating that, saying I was able to find any records for sales by Joe Snow. I cannot find anything by Joe Snow, but I'm going to base this valuation on something by the Joe I know, whose work is about the same size, well, forget size for the moment, whose work is in the same area, about the same. He was working in the 1940s and doing landscapes of Death Valley. And so I'm basing my valuation on the work of Joe I know, who did similar kinds of things, and Joe I know's work sells for X amount, and therefore I'm basing the valuation on that. So it's inexact, but it's a way of determining a value.
Another question that came in is, does an appraiser authenticate a painting? In other words, if you found it in the basement and you think it might be Remington, how do you deal with that? Yes,
that's always a somewhat difficult thing. And in the statement, in the actual appraisal form, the formal form, it says, I am not an authenticator. I accept the authentication that you give me, more or less. I assume this piece to be authentic in that way. But then, so the answer, the basic answer is no, I don't authenticate, but I would try to come close. And there might be a time when someone would say, I'm bringing you this Winslow Homer, and it's a still life of flowers. And I would say, I really question whether this is a Winslow Homer. So it might work that way. But no, I don't authenticate.
Would you advise that person to take it to be authenticated by the expert in Homer, or where do you go from there? Because the appraiser will carve out authentication, but is there a place where they could get the painting?
With well-known artists, probably, and say Winslow Homer, I think in Winslow Homer, maybe Foundation or something, or often there's an expert, you know, someone who has devoted a life to writing books about Homer, and you might communicate with that expert. It would usually be sending photos or something like that. I had the occasion to find out if some doors, painted doors painted in Morocco, were actually by Picasso or not. And I sent photos to, I found out, I can't remember how I found out, the address of Picasso's daughter in Paris, and sent photos to her, very good, very complete photos. And in due time, a lot of time, she sent back and said, no, they are not by Picasso. So it's a lot of detective work at that point, but certainly well worth doing if they turned out to be Picasso.
If you have a collection and you wanted appraised for insurance purposes or estate purposes, how do you find an appraiser?
Look online, but I think I would start with the approved societies, American Association of Appraisers, or that's the AAA, or ASA, American Society of Appraisers, and I'd look there first.
Would you call a museum, or would you ask word of mouth to?
Word of mouth is always valuable, I feel. The museum is not supposed to give recommendations, although occasionally somebody might, or somebody does, but they're not necessarily a resource. That's what I would say. It would be more word of mouth at the museum.
At the conclusion of an appraisal, what documents should you expect to receive?
I wish I had one to show. A document stating all the things that we've talked about, the date when I looked at the piece, all the information about the piece, a photograph of it in the document, a biography of the artist, short, I mean, a paragraph, perhaps something like that, but really identifying the artist and identifying this piece in his career, perhaps, something like that. It's usually about a 10 or 12 page document, even just for one piece. And unrelated, but
oh, go ahead, Ann, please.
Okay, back to collecting again. I'm afraid I'll forget to say this if I don't tuck it in now. About keeping your records. Important to keep the receipt from your purchase. Keep a file for each piece, and the receipt is very important. You can put in the file other things, articles about an artist or just other things in that file. But the important thing is the transaction of when and where you bought it. So.
I have slavishly followed your advice.
Okay, I'm glad to hear.
That was my last question. Helen, do you want to start with chat questions?
Yes, I had one thing to say to ask Ann. When I was talking with Ann about this, I said, because I'm just starting to collect, well, I just tape things on the back of the picture or the painting. And Ann, what was your answer?
My answer was, oh, that's very nice and organized, but what if something happens to the painting, then you've lost both the painting and all the documentation. So if the thief comes in and takes it off the wall, he's got everything. That's highly unlikely, but think in terms of any other way it was damaged or fire or something like that. So it should be kept separately and not on the back of the painting.
Okay. One question that came in was, how do you appraise an unsigned but authenticated piece of art?
Well, who has authenticated? Or maybe you say, okay, I bought this from Dan Sprick, so I know it's Dan's. Well, that's not the best example because Dan's living. But think about, okay, I know it, but it's very hard. Unless you find something exactly like that. I mean, it might be of a series or painted at the same time. So you could make a very strong case for this portrait is exactly like one that is signed that was done at the same time. So you could build a case for that. But if you don't have, if it's unsigned, it's hard.
Okay, thank you.
Unless there's some other documentation. I mean, you might have that sales slip and the date or some other way to track that.
Okay. Another question is, when an appraiser charges, like you said, you do $200 an hour. If you have like 30 pieces, or how do you manage that cost and the research can go on? Is that $200 an hour for the research? Explain that a little.
Yes, that's, and it is for the research also, but there are economies of scale. And one thing, look, if you look at one piece, it probably is an hour of time. If you're looking at 20 pieces, you can go through them quite efficiently and rapidly. So you're not charging 20 times 200. Maybe you're there for 2 hours to do 20 pieces. And then the research, sometimes there are economy of scale that you might have 3 pieces by the same artist. So that goes very quickly. But it really is just keeping track of the hours. And often getting an estimate saying, how long do you think this will take? And an appraiser might say, well, between 2 and 4 hours. I can't say. If I can find things easily, then 2 hours. If not, 4 hours. That kind of.
So in that regard, how is your 200 an hour? I'm sort of thinking like lawyers. I'm a lawyer, and someone will charge $250, and then you'll find someone who's charged $500. How is that kind of based on?
Oh, industry standard, I guess I would say. I think that's kind of what's charged.
Okay.
This national organization, I'll kind of check with the between what and what, and I'm in the middle. It's
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Another question that came in was, is it advised to take art to auction And if so, can you recommend some auction houses for cowboy and Native American art?
Okay, good. Yes, I think auction is a really good, efficient way to sell art.
Hmm.
And the Western, here in Denver, there is Heinemann Auction. It's Chicago-based, but they have a strong Denver office. And the process would be to take a piece or pieces or photographs of pieces, well, whatever is convenient, and meet with someone at the auction house asking if they want to take the piece, which probably they do unless there's some reason not to. And then they'll give an estimate of what they consider would be a sale price. And as you know, there's a between something and something in a catalog estimate between $900 and $1,200, the low and there's their estimate, there's their range. And they're purposely, they're always low because they want people to come in and bid and bid things up. So they would give the lower range of fair market value. So here, that's Heinemann. Western, there's the Santa Fe art auction in Santa Fe once or twice a year. Then there's the Scottsdale art auction, and that's once a year. And that's a good venue for regional and Western art. Then moving west, there's Bonham's in Los Angeles, and they do well with Western art and regional art.
How do you spell the Heinemann?
Hindman.
Oh, like Heinemann.
Hindman. I've heard Hindman. Yeah, I've heard both pronunciations.
Could you talk about the percentage that typically an auction will take for the service of selling your piece?
Yes, this you usually negotiate with the auction, but they do state in their catalogs maybe 20%. But there are other costs. There's costs for photography, so your piece has to be professionally photographed for the catalog. So that's a cost. There's transportation. Let's say you're shipping to New York to Christie's. That's a cost. So there's some extra costs, but they do state, and I think it's about 20%. But sometimes those things can be negotiated. The photography. If they really want with a piece, they may say, all right, we'll waive photography if you will submit this piece to our auction.
So I had a chat question came in. What about updating old appraisals? Does that make your work faster?
Actually, it doesn't. Because you still need to see that the piece is physically there, see the condition, and so an old appraisal might be interesting for some information that it gives. It might have some information about past owners or something that you don't have access to at the time. But you really have to start over and say, okay, today, in this condition, in this market, what is this piece worth? So it's interesting information, but not helpful, and it doesn't shorten the time it takes. Sometimes people feel, well, this shouldn't take you very long because we had an appraisal 7 years ago and you just need to add another number, but it really doesn't work that way.
Another question, this is actually one for myself. We had done a tour this past year in, actually, I think in January, of the art that was in the Hyatt downtown, and then we went across the street to La Meridian. Do you know how these hotels or how they pick a piece, and are they always appraised before they pick it?
I think it depends on the hotel and the hotel chain. Now think about a newer building and established. They usually hire an art consultant to choose the art for the whole place. And sometimes in hotels where you happen to be in several of the rooms and notice that the prints are very much the same. It might be blue flowers, but in the next room they're yellow flowers, but just like the blue flowers or something like that. So sometimes art consultants commission an artist to do a whole series for a hotel. They can get a good price. Usually their work's on paper in this particular case. So sometimes those things are commissioned for new hotels or renovated hotels. Then for a hotel that's collecting art that's not new, maybe period art that goes with the period furniture or something like that. It's probably done through a gallery or a consultant, probably a single source, and someone is the point person for the aesthetic of that hotel. And whether those pieces are appraised, I would think they would be on the hotel's asset list. So I would think somehow they have to arrive at a value for those pieces.
Another question that came in, and I know you touched a little bit about it. Does the original price you pay for something have any determination in a future appraisal?
That's a yes and no. It's certainly a basis, but I mean, you certainly work with that number, but you're still looking at the piece today and what's today's value. So it's helpful, but it's not the answer. If you purchased it yesterday and it was destroyed when your car was stolen, then that would be the price. I mean, there wouldn't be any change. But let's say it was 10 years ago, the market might have gone up, the market might have gone down. So it all depends.
Have you heard anything? This is another question that came in. Have you heard anything about how this present pandemic and how it's hitting our economy is going to make a difference for art appraising?
That it's such a timely question, and I belong to two national organizations. One is the aforementioned Appraisers Association of America, and I've been on Zoom calls with them. It's New York based, so a lot of the information is also New York based, but pertains definitely to us. One of the things I learned in the last week is that the online auction sales have been doing very well, that people are buying online. That to me is a good sign. Gallery sales, the other group of advisors, also New York based, were saying about the difficulty of people buying without seeing things, and that people can't go to galleries. This was maybe 2 weeks ago. And so they can only do so much with photos and phone calls and things like that. So they felt those things were on hold. That was more higher end things, probably. But locally, I think there's going to be quite a bit of pent up demand. I think people are going to be starved for art, if you will. That may be my bias, but I think people are going to want to see art and buy art. And as far as how that affects appraisals, it's sort of two different things. And I think people in this downtime may have been looking around in their storerooms and closets and walls and thinking, oh, I ought to have that appraised. So I'm seeing a little bit of that. And this is sort of a grim thing, but one thing, a comment that was made at one of the appraisal Zoom meetings was, well, in a few years, or in the next year or two, there are going to be a lot of appraisals, estate appraisals, because people have died from this pandemic.
That leads into a question that just came in.
Okay.
What can I do to make it easier for my heirs to handle my collection after my passing?
It's so important. One is back to your files and back to your records, so people know to know what you have and where it came from, and probably an up-to-date appraisal. But the important thing is, and I've seen this, somebody thinks, you know, my grandmother said this is a real treasure, and you know, make sure that you appreciate it and all. And then people value it by word of mouth, but come to find out it's a print, or it's a reproduction, or it's something from a catalog or something. But sometimes there's family myth around things. But to get back to the practical, to have your files up to date so people know which pieces are important and the values of them, even if not necessarily with an appraisal, but certainly the receipts and the information you have about them. And that's the best thing you can do for your family. Don't let it be a mystery, because sometimes people can track down, you know, spend an awful lot of time trying to investigate what this piece might be.
You know, there are these tax laws about taking values at the time of death as opposed to previous values. Do you work at all with that?
I haven't. I could, but I haven't been called upon to do that.
Okay. Mary, do you have some questions?
I don't. Anne, do you have anything else you need to impart to us? New collectors and potential fine art appraisal customers?
Well, just feel free to call me if you want to talk. I'm always up for that, especially now when we're all at home. But I hope I've answered the questions. And you know, knowledge is power, and the more we know about what we have and what we want to do with it, that's a good thing. So I've been delighted to be with you.
Let me ask one question. Diana Groves, one time, I don't know if you're willing to share this, but Diana had as you know, she has a wonderful art collection. And
yes.
And I wondered, Diana, I know your picture isn't on here, but I was just wondering if, I'm going to unmute you, wondering if you can tell us what you did to help with your family and this area we're just talking about. I unmuted you.
Good heavens, I can't even remember what I said.
Oh, well, I don't know if you were talking about files you had made.
Yeah, I'd heard Ann speak several years ago, and I went home and just got those manila, you know, not a huge file, just manila, and I started just putting things in it about each artwork. And, you know, I didn't care if I had only paid $20 for the piece of art. I still made a little file so the kids would know that this was by this artist. I bought it here and I loved it, and I had it reframed, and the frame was 5 times the cost of the painting, but I still love it. So that's kind of what I've done. And so don't think that, you know, when we first started collecting, we bought things for $75. It turned out later to be worth $200,000. And so stick it in a file. You don't know what's going to happen with that artist. So.
Yeah, well said, Diane. You don't know what's going to happen, and that information is so valuable. And it doesn't matter what you paid for it; it matters later. Later, what it's worth, and the enjoyment that you've had is the point.
Oh, Ann, is it important in what you've seen to put a name of an heir on a piece? Have you ever had that where there's problems that way?
Not exactly, but you know, that's so personal. That's in the family too. But no, I haven't run into that directly. But I know what you're saying, right?
And we want to thank you so very much for speaking to us. I know I learned a lot today, so thank you. Thank you very much. And all of us at Mad About Art look forward to next month's program. So that'll be coming out, so be on the lookout. And again, Ann, can't thank you enough.
I'm happy to have done this. Thank you all.
Well, we're getting in a lot of thank yous from the various people. I just thought that if there was somebody who, I'm looking at the gallery view, who couldn't figure out chat, who had a brief question, you could raise your hand and I will unmute you. If there's anybody here who would like to do that, I can see you raising your hand. I will look on everybody's. Is there anybody here who would like to ask something? Maybe you all have been smart enough to send them on through the chat. All right. Well, you guys, looking forward to a month from today, our next program you are all going to enjoy very much. And thank you so much. Have a wonderful week and stay safe. Thanks, Ann.
You're more than welcome. Bye.
Bye-bye.